Welcome to the Art of Semi-Fiction. I am Robynne Miller.
And I'm Jane Daly.
And today we're going to be talking about increasing stakes. If you remember several episodes ago, we said we'd do it. So here we are fulfilling our promise. Doing it. So, Jane.
Yes.
What you crack me up. What is your definition of stakes for all of those out there who are thinking stakes on the Barbie?
No, stakes are literally what's at stake to create conflict in your novel. So it's either physical death, could be spiritual death, psychological death, financial death. Any kind of death or loss is stakes.
Exactly.
Is that what you would say?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. In some, I think that death is definitely the ultimate stakes, but it could be something that is just tragically, it's super important, whatever it is. And like we've talked about, when you watch something or pick up a book, you're not picking up a book just to see like almost like a trail cam experience, the deer walking by. There's got to be some reason.
There has to be conflict, or it's just not going to be interesting. Because I've picked up a book, you've picked up a book, or we've started watching a movie where it's like happy people in happy land, and you're like, I don't want to watch this because
what's the point?
Right.
And the conflict, like you said, and that was a great point. Some people think that stakes have to be external peril. So somebody's trying to come kill them or something outside, but you can have internal stakes too, emotional and spiritual stakes. You may be wavering in your faith. The character might be wavering in their faith, or they may betrayal might be on the horizon, and that could just crush them and send them spinning. So there's a lot of things that can be stakes, but you were absolutely right. It's whatever is at stake for the characters. And it's important that it is some big risk. It has to be something that is really important. It cannot be, and we've joked about this already, it cannot be, if I go to my favorite bakery, will I get the last roll? Who cares? That may be important to you. Nobody else is going to care.
Right.
So it is important that it has a little bit more of a global and larger scale kind of conflict.
It can be as literal as being chased through the woods by a knife-wielding madman, or it could be something internal where your main character has to overcome some mental or psychological mountain.
Yep. And you mentioned this. We're going to talk about a few samples.
Okay.
But you mentioned in one of them that we've talked about now, Francine Rivers, The Last Sin Eater, and it's a good point to make here. Those stakes aren't just for your main character either. You have to have everybody have something at stake. Even your protagonist. I mean, your antagonist has got to have something that is at stake. Otherwise, why is he the antagonist or she? So
what's the point? Yeah.
Exactly. So we're going to look at a couple of samples. Francine Rivers' Last Sin Eater, I just said, and you said you've watched the movie.
I watched the movie, and it was very powerful. There were a lot of stakes. Lots of stakes. But I mean, not only just the psychological, but there was also the physical stakes.
Exactly.
There was bodily threats
and spiritual
harm.
And it was just saturated with spiritual stakes.
Oh,
so in that one, there is a little girl who thinks that she's responsible for something. So she's trying to seek atonement. So that's one of her biggest, she's bucking family traditions, her community's traditions, and physical danger in order to get that atonement that she is so hungry for. And
she's willing to face death. So there's a physical and a psychological death at stake.
Exactly. And then spiritual comes into it, because there is a moment where she has to, again, buck all of the community and what they say and the parents and everything to seek a spiritual input into her life. Yep. So that's her stakes, and reconciliation with her mom, because she thinks she's totally destroyed any chance of being a full daughter in this family because of what she's done. But you mentioned that there are other stakes because she befriends a boy, and he has.
Well, he's physically threatened by his father with death. I mean, he gets beaten and is left for dead. So his stakes are physical.
Yeah. And
Also,
ostracizing, beyond.
oh,
I don't know what.
ostracism.
Yeah,
Ostracism.
thank you. I'm having trouble with my words today, my big words. Being ostracized from a society when you're in a rural, small,
Very
remote
small
location,
community. Mhm.
that's not just like, well, it would be horrible if it was in the middle of a city, but there they would have to literally leave their physical home
Mhm.
and their community and their family home. So there's a lot of stakes in there, which is part of why it's riveting. It's a riveting story. Cynthia Ruchti, her latest novel, Miles from Where We Started, the stakes there are there's a young couple who's newly married, and they're exiting their marriage. They're on the brink of saying we're done within, I think it's a couple of years. And of course their faith is taking a knock, and the husband's business is failing, or is at risk of failing. So there's plenty of stakes there as well. And I was mentioning one of the books that we were assigned that I'd never heard of this author, but she's very famous, world famous, New York Times bestselling author, apparently, Elena Ferrante. She wrote a book called My Brilliant Friend. And it's about her life growing up where there was in Italy with mafia and other things, kind of their society, but there's physical death and there's reputation loss and there's loss of relationship and friends, depending on who you're friends with and how it all plays out. And it's really, really complicated. But again, there's so many stakes for so many of the characters that it's just a riveting story. So even if you don't really like kind of mafia things, and I wouldn't have picked it up because it's not Little House on the Prairie. So I wouldn't have picked it up, but it was absolutely brilliantly done. Because of the volume of stakes. There's so many characters with stakes. So I hope we've established that stakes are needed.
Stakes are important
to keep your reader riveted.
Yes, to keep your reader interested.
But of course, nobody really wants to know just that it's important. They want to know how to do it.
That would be my next question.
How to do it. So I've got 8 points, and I'm going to try to zip through them. And I know that this is something that we've talked about because we are in a writing group together, and also we just talk writing all the time. I'm trying to give an excuse of why we might not just talk writing all the time.
There are no excuses.
We're slightly
Only
addicted.
Reasons.
So one tip is to make a wise choice when you enter a story. So
yeah, we've talked about that. Where do you actually enter a story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction?
Yep. And why would that be important?
Well, you want to enter the story at a time. So like your very first few lines are kind of establishing where you are, but then something has to come along immediately and interrupt that little life, because you're coming into normal life. Boom. There has to be some sort of disruption. And it doesn't have to be gunshots. It doesn't have to be someone breaking through your front door. It could be a phone call that you were not expecting.
And that's about to change the trajectory. And I just wrote a quick example. If your POV character, your point of view character, is a painful introvert and has been all their life, choose a moment when their world is about to be turned upside down. Perhaps their parent is dying and they will lose their job and home because maybe they've been caregivers. So that's one where if they've been an introvert all their lives, you're not going to start the story 10 years before the moment where things are about to change, because then we're just going to say, and she went, she ordered her groceries on Tuesday and left her money in an envelope under the mat on Wednesday. It's going to be just mundane, boring stuff.
Right.
You want to enter it in when something is happening that will change what the status quo is.
Right.
So number 2 is make sure the stakes are personal to the main characters. Don't have the conflict happen around them with little impact to their lives, no matter what happens. So they can't just be watching the conflict. It's pretty important that they have something at stake. So if, in my introvert example, if her parents were dying, but leaving her $1 million and she could stay in her little introverted world, then them dying really isn't a big deal, because
that's not stakes.
No, because she's still, sad that her parents are dying, but she's going to be able to, nothing will change in her world. She can still order her groceries. She can still not interact with society.
But if in the will, her parents say, you don't get the $1 million until you spend a year in
Yes.
Italy,
Now that changes things.
That would be stakes.
Exactly.
She has to actually travel out of the country. She's never had a passport.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of, that could be stakes.
Exactly. But if it happens to somebody else and there's absolutely no reason. So I'm thinking of To Kill a Mockingbird.
Mm-hmm.
Scout was watching what was happening. I mean, obviously there's a lot of stakes going on around her, and people in jail and communities and racism and all that stuff, but it was also impacting her. It was changing how she formulated, what society is and what fairness is and what racism was.
Mm-hmm.
So it changed her. So even though she was, in a sense, watching all this through the eyes of a little girl, it was impacting her profoundly.
Mm-hmm.
If she was just recounting the story, maybe she's not the best one to tell the story because she doesn't have any emotional, money in the game.
There's no connection. Yeah.
No money in the game.
No skin in the game.
Skin in the game. That's right. I am so not cool. So with that in mind, make the personal stakes part of a larger conflict. So in the example with my introvert, what if what if there's also a ward of the introvert or the grandparents or something living in the house? And what if she'll be lost into the foster care system if the introvert can't find a way to function in society? So maybe now we've got the ward has conflict because she's lost her grandparents and maybe lose her home and her connection to her only biological relative. We've got stakes growing. Make the personal thing that has to happen. So it's now not just about the introvert needing to overcome her fear of people and society, but there's also another life hanging in the balance.
Yeah.
That's the way
that would increase your stakes.
So that's a way of taking personal stakes and connecting them to a larger picture of stakes. And you don't want just little stakes that are all kind of floating, separately. You want them somehow interconnected to the main POV character in some way. Some way. Here's a good one. Number 4 is make sure there's a deadline.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, because you don't want it to drag on forever.
And you want to know, doesn't the reader want to know that something has got to happen? At some point, you can't just say, this is our issue and it may be resolved in 10, 15, 20 years, 1,000 years, who knows? They want to know that some deadline is coming so that it'll be resolved, that they'll have emotional satisfaction.
So that there's some sort of satisfactory ending.
Yep. So if you have conflict, but you're like, it's not quite as amped up. It's not quite as tension filled as you'd like it to have. Put a deadline on it in some way. She's got 6 months to live. They've got 3 months to figure out this introvert thing before they lose the house. They've got, if this next contract doesn't come through, the business is lost. Something where there's a deadline.
For example, recently read My Sister's Keeper. And I know that it was a movie, but I just never saw the movie. And I just recently read the book. Every single character had a stake in some way. And there was a deadline. If the main character didn't give her kidney to her sister was going to die.
Yeah, that's a deadline.
Yeah, that would
be an example of a very strong
really
deadline.
High stakes.
Exactly. And it's funny how you don't necessarily think about that when you're reading. I don't think, what is the deadline of this thing happen? If it's organically put in, you will know that there's a deadline, but it doesn't even have to say on Tuesday the 12th of, this is when all this is going to come.
And courtroom dramas do this really well because they're generally within, say, a week or 2 week time when you get to court. So you know that there's going to be a verdict at the end. It's going to be at the end of this trial. There's going to be either a guilty or not guilty verdict. And in between is all the drama that happens to the main characters. Yeah.
And I never, ever watch, the shows that I watch are pretty much cooking shows, singing competition shows. I got my 12-year-old into me now involved in Ninja Warriors. That's really cool.
That is an interesting.
That's super cool.
Okay, so there's a lot of stakes in Ninja Warriors.
There are a lot of stakes. But I was recently with my 18-year-old and he likes cop shows, as 18-year-olds are supposed to. And I would say, okay, if you watch an Alaska show with me, I'll watch that. Kind of, we did that little dance for a while. And I was really, because I don't like them. I don't like scary stuff. I don't like blood. I don't like any of that. I don't like it at all. But I let my mind think about it as if each episode being a novel, and there was always a deadline. For some of those cop shows, there literally is, you have 24 hours to find the girl or she's going to die, kind of, deadlines. but there's always some sort of external deadline, not just we've been chasing this guy for years. There's some reason why now this episode is showing this story, and it has to resolve by a certain time, or everything's going to go kind of horrible. So those stakes that we were talking about, that they not only have to be there, but they have to really, really drive the story forward. So we want to kind of keep that in mind. Number 5 is make sure your characters have consequences for their choices, but don't make a beeline for the best one, because mistakes are human, right? So if we know that, for example, in your kidney, the kidney transplant, maybe she didn't really want to go through that because she was scared of giving it, maybe scared of surgery or something.
So she didn't want to give it.
So maybe
that was the whole conflict, is she did not want to give her sister the kidney.
Well, and if you're in that situation, aren't you going to say, are there any other options? What else can we do? Can we look at dead people who don't care anymore about their kid? Those are the ways that we can see the character and understand their own fears.
Well, and another thing is that I was at a writers conference, and I went to a workshop by Donald Maas, M-A-A-S. And anyway, I won't go into his history, but he said, have your main character do something that they wouldn't normally do as a result of those stakes. So if your character normally would respond with, oh, that's okay, I'll take care of it, have your main character say, no, you are so on your own. Just totally different, because that will also increase the stakes, because we don't always respond the same way.
Exactly. And if you do have your character does something, don't always make it, well, then that solved part of the problem, and then we do another thing and that solved another problem. Right. We want to increase the tension, and remember, the whole talk we're giving is increasing stakes. Have them make mistakes, have them have little setbacks, have them make a decision that is poor, so that maybe out of their own fears or their own foibles and flaws, so that the stakes are even more amplified, because now they've either wasted time or they've made the problem worse. They've cheated somebody off they needed to be kind to, whatever. Maybe in that case, if she was like, I don't want to give my kidney, so I'm going to search a database of other people, and her sister finds out about it and says, I am your sister, and you won't even just jump to giving, that then the tension between their relationship, because of her poor decision, could raise the stakes, because it's just another level of tension. Okay. And we've kind of mentioned this already. Number 6 is create smaller stakes in scenes and chapters. Your main POV character can't be the only one who has something at stake. Right?
Exactly.
And you mentioned it with the Francine Rivers, the Last Sin Eater, that there were other characters there who had some serious stuff at stake, physical stuff, and so safety and all sorts of things. So that's important, and that's one person's stakes are the driving force of the whole reason for a story or whatever. But we need to have something going on around them too, other people involved in something that has some peril. Okay. Number 7, put your main character into situations where their flaws and fears and foibles are exposed and tested. So what
we just said.
And in our introvert thing, we're going to have her go out of the house, right? Just even her walking outside is going to be a big deal.
I read a book about a novel. We're probably going to get close to time, but I read a novel about a guy who was an agoraphobic, and a little girl upstairs befriended him, and she, through the course of events, got him to get out of his house, like 2 steps out, and then the next time it was 4 steps, until he was finally walking her to school.
Wow.
Because her mother was a drug addict anyway. So
more stakes.
There was huge stakes.
Yeah, but you have to put them into those situations where their real character is going to be both negatively exposed, that they're afraid, or going to be positively exposed.
Well, and it's not like, all of a sudden in this book he was fine. There was a lot of drama.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point too. You can't just say we have an agoraphobic, or we have a painful introvert, or whatever we have, and then we give them a self-help talk, and then that afternoon they were fine.
He was fine. Yeah.
So we can't do that. And number 8, and the final one, is make sure you add a twist.
Right. I love twists.
I know you love twists. I had an experience, and I can't remember we talked about it on a previous podcast, but my 12-year-old and I are writing a book, and we were talking about it as we were in Home Depot looking for something, and we had just finished figuring out what the main conflict was and what the main drama was, and we were both super excited. And he was waiting while I was choosing knobs for cabinets, and I turned around with tears in my eyes because I just realized what the main character did that was like a total twist. And I didn't know he was going to do that. And I'm literally crying because it was such a powerful twist. And I couldn't get it out for a minute. But when I told my son, he was like, we're both crying in Depot. And it was so exciting.
So you're the sobs that I heard
yeah,
when I was down there.
That would be us. But that's
vanities.
that's the power of a twist.
Yeah.
When you have somebody doing something you didn't expect, even if you've done beautifully a job of ramping up your stakes through the whole thing, you've got a lot of conflict and tension. If you can throw something unexpected at the end, it's the most exquisite.
It's going to captivate your readers.
It's an exquisite kind of moment in writing. And predictability is the absolute, it is a fire extinguisher to all flames.
Oh,
so
always. Yeah.
So there we go. So there's 8 tips on how to increase stakes. I am Robynne Miller.
I am Jane Daly.
You have been listening to The Art of Semi-Fiction,
where we explore every corner of the written word.
Thank you for joining us. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review.
Thanks a lot.